Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 11th and final Niagara Hockey Coaches Seminar webinar presentation. This is our first evening presentation. Before we get started with our presenter, I just wanted to take this time to say thank you to our audience. A number of you have tuned in to all of the presentations live. Some of you are first-time viewers. But without everyone here, this is certainly not possible. And I also wanted to take the time to thank Murray Nystrom, without whom none of this is possible, arranging speakers, and Greg Capillero for being a constant sounding board and someone who's come to the idea table, generating some ideas and support. And then, of course, Wayne Chapman, landing the big fish, getting Daryl Belford to come on was a really big moment for our webinar series. The Niagara Hockey Coaches Seminar started as a grassroots level seminar in front of 42 people live in 2017, really with the intention of bringing resources to grassroots level coaches in the Niagara region. Since then, this year with the pandemic, we've expanded to a global audience with over 1,000 unique live viewers from 17 different countries, and not just grassroots level coaches, but coaches of all levels, men's and women's, boys and girls, youth hockey, junior hockey, university and pro levels, and pretty much everything in between. And that includes 4,000 plus views on YouTube. So, thank you to you for tuning in, and the countless number of tweets, texts, and emails and positive feedback that we've received. You guys are why we do it. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over now to Rachel Dorey. She is the Director of Advanced Performance currently at York University. She also scouts for elite prospects and is the co-host of the Staff and Graph podcast, which I just started listening to this week. I'm ashamed to admit that I just started tuning in. But yeah, she's got some really unique insights on integrating statistics into coaching. And so I will turn it over now to Rachel.
Great, thank you. I'm just gonna get the PowerPoint started up. All right, so like Wes said, I'm Rachel Dorey. I just want to have a couple disclaimers before I get started. I have a dog that likes to bark a lot, and my family's currently having dinner, so if you hear conversation, I've tried to mitigate it by sitting in the basement. We'll see how that goes. So tonight I'm going to be talking to you about effectively integrating statistics in coaching and development. I think that sort of as more statistics become available, especially player tracking in the NHL, it's really important to be able to use everything that you have available to you to get the most out of not only each individual player, but out of your team as a whole. And so that's what I'm going to be focusing on tonight. So just a little bit about the current landscape. Personally, I think the word analytics is a barrier, which is why I've chosen to use the word statistics instead. I think that a lot of people get afraid when they hear the word analytics because it sounds like a really fancy math term that a lot of people don't really want to put the effort into understand, when the reality of the situation is it's really just a statistic. And no matter what kind of industry you're in, or as little coaching you do or as much coaching as you do, you use statistics because a shot on goal, a goal, an assist, a penalty minute, like that's all statistics. It's just now we have new statistics. And so I think using the word analytics is just a barrier. So I think you'll hear kind of tonight that the language we use is really important as coaches. There's lots of information available right now, whether you're coaching at the minor league level. Obviously, the NHL has the most amount of information. They're getting player tracking, but just kind of being behind the scenes, they contract out various statistics and different things from different companies such as SportLogic, Instat, Iceberg sometimes. Sometimes they have their own internal statistic databases. And so there's a ton of information available, and it's just being able to differentiate between what is helpful and what is noise. So a good example of that is SportLogic gives you like thousands of data points per game on each player. And obviously you're not going to need every single data point from every single game on every single player. So you have to be able to figure out what is helpful and useful for you as a staff and for your players, and what is noise. And what I mean by noise is it's not that it's useless. It just doesn't register as something that's very key for yourself as a coach or just in the organization as a whole, right? So if it's a micro stat as like a pass from, they have passing locations. The odds that you're going to need passing locations in the neutral zone as a broad trend are probably pretty thin when you compare it to something like scoring chances. So you have to figure out what's important in the grand scheme of things before you just start dumping information on people, because that's when people tune you out. The big one, I think, are the next 2 points. Closed-mindedness towards new thinking. It's no secret. There's a lot of people that work in hockey or just in general in other industries that are closed-minded to perspectives that don't align with their own. And I think that if you're not willing to value perspectives that aren't different from your own, then you're probably not going to be able to make the best decision you can, because you won't have all of the information available to you. So the closed-mindedness surrounding analytics, statistics, whatever you want to call them, is a huge barrier right now in hockey, because a lot of the people who are in charge aren't as willing to accept them as they perhaps should be. And then the last one is an unwillingness to be uncomfortable. And that's everyone involved. That is someone who uses statistics that's trying to break in and show maybe a head coach or a general manager that, hey, this is something we should use, because they don't want to buck the norms. It's a player who doesn't necessarily want to hear about it. It's a coach that doesn't necessarily want to hear about it. It's everyone involved. And if you're not willing to be uncomfortable, then you're not really improving. So for me, the only way that you can really improve is when you step out of your comfort zone. So that's kind of where we are currently. And I think that that's important kind of going into this presentation. So how do I look at analytics? It's a tool. Everything you have is a tool. So I've got this graphic, I guess, and everything goes into evaluation, because at the end of the day, you're trying to evaluate your team, trying to evaluate your players. And it doesn't matter whether it's on a micro or a macro level, whether it's a game to game or how did we do this season? How are we trending over the past 20 games, let's say? It's a tool. And everything that is in this funnel gets used to evaluate your team. So you have statistics, you have the eye test, and you have coaching pillars. And I would say 90% of the teams that I have either worked with or spoken to, kind of had interaction with, the eye test is about 70% of the evaluation, statistics is about 10%, and the coaching pillars are about 20%. What I mean by coaching pillars is like the culture and the structure of the team. So we want to play fast. We want to play physical. We want to play north-south or east-west. Like those are the coaching pillars. The eye test, every coach, every GM will say, well, my eye test, like that's what I trust on. I don't go with anything else. I mean, I think you're lacking at that point, because that's your eye test, whether you like to admit it or not, is very biased, because you can have a bias towards or against a player, and that impacts how you view them on any given night. And so I think having the statistics as an integral component of the evaluation allows you to have an unbiased opinion and say, okay, this is what I think. Does it match what the numbers say? And if it does, then that's good, because that kind of gives you a barometer of how you are viewing things in relation to something that's unbiased. But if you say this player was great tonight, and you see that possession-wise, this player was like 32%, was -4, even though plus minus is not a super great stat that I like to use, and got like scoring chances way in favor of the other team, had a bunch of turnovers, but they weren't in dangerous areas, so they didn't really lead to anything. That should tell you that maybe you might have a bias towards that player, and you need to evaluate that. So at the end of the day, really all it is a tool, and it needs to be a part of the puzzle. So like I said, when we break down into what statistics and analytics are, here's what they do. They remove bias. They allow for an anonymous evaluation. And what that means is when I give a coach the game scores or realistically any statistics other than like goals, assists, penalty minutes, things like that. Sometimes I will give them to the coach without the names. And I will say, okay, I want you to try and pick out who is where. And there's definitely some obvious ones in the positive and the negative. But what that tells me is, okay, if he ranks a player higher, that means this is where he thinks that player is, and he might have a slightly biased perception of that player. So this kind of allows you to take that away and say, okay, if you remove what you think of the player, this is what a whole bunch of stats say about the player. It also challenges conventional thinking. So we kind of touched on this at the beginning. People don't like to challenge the way they think because it makes them uncomfortable. And so when you're looking at conventional thinking, it's, well, I think this player moves the puck well. I think this player enters the zone with speed. This player plays fast, whatever the case may be. But if you say, oh, this player moves the puck well, and then I go look and his breakout percentage, so his ability to make a pass on the breakout, is successful less than half the time, then I'm going to challenge that because clearly that player doesn't move the puck well if they can't make a breakout pass as a defenseman. It also helps with blind spots. So this is where I think that statistics have the biggest opportunity. A lot of coaches will say, well, this player does X, Y, and Z very well. And then sometimes they'll have issues coming up with weaknesses or vice versa. This player does X, Y, and Z terribly, and then they'll have issues coming up with strengths. And sometimes where the removed bias kind of anonymous evaluation comes in is it can show a player's strength or weaknesses that you may not have seen just using your eye test. I think the one thing that's important to point out, though, is it can't be used singularly. And what I mean by that is you can't cherry pick. It's very easy to cherry pick, especially if you're in one of the leagues that affords you the ability to have just a plethora of data available to you. You can make any model you want. And I kind of did this to prove a point when I was doing a project about a couple of defensemen. I proved that I could make any defenseman look good if I cherry picked certain stats that made that defenseman look good. And I also proved that I could make them look terrible if I cherry pick stats that make them look bad. You have to be able to have a set of standards. Okay, this is what we're evaluating on. And we're not just going to cherry pick and say, okay, well, this was good for this player, therefore that player is good. You can't do it that way. It has to be across the board. These are our key performance indicators. Things to live by. So I've kind of reading, talking to people, kind of come up with some different things based on experience and other people's experience that have helped, especially when I'm somebody who really does like to use numbers. So when you're approaching someone who, let's face it, you're about to challenge their conventional thinking, the first thing, you don't have all the answers because you don't have all the data. And odds are there's stuff that you don't know about the data that you have. So you can't come in and say, like, this is the end all and be all, and this is what I'm saying, this is what the numbers are saying, this is correct. Because sometimes it's not correct. And so you can't come in and present like you have all the answers. You have to, in the same way that you're asking whomever you're speaking with to be open to what you're saying, you have to be receptive to what they're saying as well. Relationship building, and we'll get to this, but it matters. If you don't have a relationship with the player that you're working with the coach, with anybody in management, it literally doesn't matter. You could tell them that the sky is purple, and if you have a good relationship with them, then like, okay, maybe they'll think you're crazy, but they'll listen. But if you tell them, okay, player X is good, and these are the reasons why, and their perception of the player is different, but you don't have a good relationship, the odds are they're probably not going to listen to you. This is a big one, though. Show them how it can help. So you have to make believers out of them. And this goes for the players, too. It's not just the coaches. It's also the players. You have to show anybody involved that it can help them. Because the reality of the situation is, if it's not going to help me, I don't care. So it's one of those things where you have to make it worth their while. And if you can make it worth their while, you're more likely to make believers out of them, and they're more likely to integrate it into their daily routine of evaluation. This kind of goes with the you don't have all the answers. You need to do the research to back up your ideas. So you can't just stroll into the coach's office or go and have a player meeting and say, okay, I think you should enter the zone cutting across the middle because it results in more shots for you. And then if I pull up the stats and that's not the case, well, you're going to end up looking pretty dumb because it's the complete opposite or it's just not the case. You have to have done the research to back up your ideas. So one of the biggest recommendations I can have there is read things that are available even on the internet, talk to people, like use the resources that are available, because odds are you'll find conflicting ideas and you'll be able to create kind of a meta-analysis and say, okay, I can take this from here, I can take this from another article, these are my own personal beliefs, but you have to be able to explain it and back it up. Because if I just come in and say, okay, we need to run 5 forwards on the power play, my head coach is going to look at me and go, are you out of your mind? We don't have a single player that can make a pass. So at that point, of course, you can't play with 5 forwards, because at that point you're going to run into trouble breaking the puck out or whatever you are having issues with. You've got to be able to research and back up your ideas. Fifth one, results breed support. So you've got to start small. You can't just walk in and expect that you're going to blow everything up and it's going to be done your way and you're going to use statistics and it's going to be as analytically driven team. It's not going to work like that. You have to get one person at a time to start believing. And as you start to get one player, one coach, just really small, then you'll start to change the thinking. Because once one guy believes, specifically as it pertains to players, if one guy believes, it starts to spread. So then his buddies his line mates, the people he hangs out with, then they'll start to believe because they see that it's working. Same with the coach. If one assistant coach likes it or if the head coach likes it, it'll breed into the coach's room. So starting small. I'm going to use a player example. We'll get to the team and sort of the meta part of this, but this is a player at York. He was a 5th-year player, and he was on his second school. So in his first 3 years at the first school, he had 15 points in 43 games. And then in his 4th year, which was his first year at York, he played on the 4th line, and it was called the meat line. And the reason it was called the meat line was because every guy on that line was over 6'3", over 200 pounds, and basically all they did was go in, cycle the puck, lean on guys. But they created no scoring chances. They got almost no points. They didn't really get scored on, but they didn't do anything either. So it was kind of just we're going to hold the puck and not really be all that productive with it, but we're also not going to cost you. Year 5. So this was this past season. 15 points, including a career high in goals. He doubled his goal output. He's got one of the best work ethics on the team. He's one of the 3 trucks. So now he was considered, we had a truck line, and basically what that line did was it was our most dominant possession line. It created the most scoring chances for a stretch of, I want to say 35% of our season. And they were really productive with how they played because they changed their thought process in what they needed to do with the puck when they had it. They were so good at keeping it on the cycle, but we needed to be able to create scoring chances out of it. So all you had to do was flip that mindset. And what did it result in? A pro contract. So he finished the year on a pro contract, and the team wants him back next year. He doesn't even know if he wants to go back because he might want to get into coaching or he might want to go to Europe. So it's kind of one of those things where a flip of the mindset, you make someone into a believer and you can really change. And so I asked this player for this presentation just to kind of, from the start of the season to where we are now, what changed your opinion? And he goes, this is exactly what he said. I wasn't a fan of the analytics from the beginning, which you knew. But after you showed me the results and showed me footage of guys like Taylor Hall, I think it clicked for me to give it a chance. So he basically started, and he was probably the most standoffish of the entire team. But like I said, you have to show them, you have to make them believe. And once I showed him, okay, it's working for NHL players, he kind of said, okay, well, if it's working for NHL players, why shouldn't I get this a chance? So you kind of start to create that belief. Changing the mindset. So we talked about how this player changed his mindset. This is how you can do that. So you have to show previous trends of play. And you can do this with coaches as well. You can say, okay, your team is not having success in these areas, and you show them these trends. So one of the big things was we were giving up the blue line a lot. and we were giving up a ton of scoring chances. Well, why are we giving up a ton of scoring chances? Well, we're giving up controlled entries a lot. But the coach didn't know this because all he could do was see it. He didn't really have the numbers to back that up. And when I showed him, okay, we're giving up the line this much, okay, now we've got to really adjust that. And then I showed him examples of teams that didn't give up the line, but I showed him using NHL teams and OHL teams and other video that I had access to. He kind of had a better understanding of this is what success looks like when you mitigate the rush. When you're doing it for a player, I highly recommend to start, show them, use video of them versus video of an NHL player. So it kind of creates this aha moment. So for one particular player, different player, his kind of NHL comparison, I would say, would be somebody like Matt Zuccarello. So instead of showing him video of Connor McDavid and Sidney Crosby, which very clearly would not be helpful, I showed him in a side-by-side a video of him and then a video of Matt Zuccarello making that exact same play in a situation, but he just made a different decision. So once the players start to kind of see, okay, these are players that are my comparables, and this is what my coach is asking for me, and they're giving me an example. A lot of players are visual learners, and so now you're able to have it click in the player's mind, okay, this is what I need to do. They go out on the ice for practice or for the game, and now they have a clear understanding of what needs to be done. The same thing with systems. So I say, okay, we need to play a Winnipeg Jets power play. Well, it's all fine and dandy, you want to draw that up, but you need to show them how it works. What passing lanes are available? What shooting lanes are available? Where are the opportunities? Once you show them what the opportunities are and a team actually executing it, then the players have an idea and the coaches have an idea of what this looks like when it's being executed properly. And they also then have an idea of what it looks like when it's not being executed properly. You also need to build patience and trust. So this one player, he wasn't a believer right away. I had to build that trust with him. Like, okay, I can help you, but you also have to be willing to change your way of thinking. And you've got to be patient. As somebody who is introducing a new way of thinking, making someone uncomfortable, you have to be patient because people are not going to take that well right away. If there are any minor hockey coaches, I'm sure you can attest that if you tell a minor hockey parent that their player is being moved off the first line because of XYZ, they're not going to take that very well, and it usually results in a lot of yelling that's really unnecessary. So it's one of those things where you've got to build the patience with the players and with the coaches. They're not going to take everything you have to say right away and use it as gospel. And with the players, most conversations, they aren't numbers related. So you got to think of it as a check-in. So this particular player that I had, I strive to have good relationships with all of the players because I think it's really beneficial if they can come to you about things that aren't just hockey related. Oh, I'm struggling, in my case at York, I'm struggling with school. And a lot of the guys are in the business program, so are a lot of the women. Okay, well, I can help you with that. So I want them to be able to feel comfortable coming to me, not just for hockey. So a lot of it is, hey, how are you doing? How's this class? How's this class? Are you feeling good for your exams? And then it's a two-way street. So they'll ask me, hey, like, have you ever done an assignment like this? Or what do you think of this? I saw this play in the NHL last night. What do you think about it? So it's one of those things where you're not always talking about the numbers. Sometimes you'll have your development meetings and you'll say, okay, this is where you stand. These are your numbers. These are what need to improve. These are the trends. But if you make every conversation about the numbers, they're going to get tired of it. So you've got to have other conversations. It can't just be, oh, we're going to talk about numbers today. I think maybe I spoke with this player about numbers once a week, but I was on the ice for 2 to 3 hours with him daily. And a lot of the other players, it was, hey, how are you doing? How's this? How's that? You've got to build that relationship. So relationship building, like I said, you've got to engage outside of hockey and show them that you're invested in them. So like one of the best examples I can think of is we had a first-year player this year who we thought was going to step into the lineup, and he kind of got his chance at the beginning. It didn't go as well as we had kind of expected, and then he was out of the lineup. And he kind of really struggled with that because he didn't really understand. He thought he was getting kind of a big opportunity. And we couldn't just have meetings with him about his numbers, about his play, because that wasn't productive. He just wasn't as engaged. We needed to build that relationship with him so that he knew that when the time came, we would go to bat for him as coaches to get him in the lineup, whether it was myself, it was another assistant coach, even the head coach. But we also had a good enough relationship where when he got a little bit cocky, we had to knock him down a few pegs and say, listen, this is what we need you to improve on before we can put you back in the lineup, because we can't have you as a defensive liability out there on our checking line. It doesn't work like that. So you've got to show them, okay, I'm willing to help you, but you've got to pull some rope too. So it's about life as well. I think this is a key part. You have to be consistent about where they stand. I think it does a complete disservice to any player and realistically any coach to not be upfront about where a player stands. So if in the coach's room you're talking about, oh, this player, he does this incorrectly, he does this, he's frustrating me here, but he does this really well. And then they come in the office for a player meeting because they're frustrated and you don't tell them any of that. I think that's kind of dishonest. You've got to be upfront and say, okay, listen, you're not in the lineup because of X, Y, and Z. Or if you are in the lineup but you've been taken off the power play, you've been taken off the power play because you can't take a pass. So it does no good to not be honest from that perspective. And I think that that's especially important in any year-end meetings or at the beginning, so you don't set false expectations. You've got to show belief in their potential. So if the player, it's really simple. If the player doesn't believe that you believe in them as a coach, they're not going to listen to you, because at that point, hey, my coach doesn't believe in me, who cares? You've got to be able to articulate the plan. So A, you've got to have a plan. And B, you've got to be able to tell them, okay, this is what we're doing. This is the progress I'd like to see. If not, we will adjust it in this way. So you've got to show them that you're dedicated enough that you're prepared. Because if you're not prepared, then, you're not going to get that investment from them. And then the last one, you've got to put the ball in their court. So what I did with the player that saw improvement was I said, okay, this is what I can do to help you. This is what I have planned out. If you want my help, you need to come to me. I am not chasing you because I have 30 other players on this roster that I need to be able to manage and help. So you want my help, you come to me and we will execute this plan. And like he said, the countless hours we put in showed me that you were committed to helping me, even at times of frustration, which him and we did have a lot of moments of frustration, still put in the time and effort. And I showed him the right way, the way I wanted him to do it and the way I believed he would be successful. So I think it's one of those things where you have to put the time and effort in as a coach, but you also need that from them. So it's a two-way street. You have to be able to show them. So this is just kind of a quick slide on some of the things I show the players. I'm not going to show you everything. I can't do that. So this is a shot location map here. The blue X's are shots on goal. The red O's are shots that were deflected. The yellow ones are shots that were, the red ones were missed shots. The orange ones were deflected, and the yellow ones were blocked. And the stars are even strength goals. So I was able to show the players, every single one of them individualized, okay, this is where you're getting shots from, this is where you're having success, et cetera, et cetera. Then there was game score. So game score is a super broad metric that you can use. And I just showed each player when we had a meeting where they ranked, and the different colors of the bars just show games played. So the darker the blue, the more games played. If it's red, that means they don't have as many games played. So I was able to rank them and show them, okay, this is where you rank in your team. And then I just kind of made this chart to show the difference. You've got to be able to show the players the difference in the progress in their play. So the first column is 2018-19, and then the second column is this past season. So this player would miss the net almost 50% of the time. And then we started really working on his shot, which was his best attribute. And we cut that way down. Like, he was hitting the net 70% of the time, which if you actually look at shooting attempts, that's pretty high. 5-on-5 goals. Last year he had 3 goals. This year he had 7 even strength goals in 27 games. Shots on goal. Last year, 1.17 a game. This year, over double. The chances for was a big one. So last year he wasn't getting into the dirty areas of the ice. He wasn't really creating scoring chances with his line. There wasn't really much going on. This year, that line dominated for scoring chances. They were creating like a whole bunch per game, and he was a huge part of that. So you can see like 2.6 per game means he's getting a ton of shot attempts off from the danger areas, whether it be even strength or on the power play. You got to communicate clearly. So you got to make it understandable. I never once have I showed up to a coach's meeting, a player's meeting, anything with a spreadsheet. That is completely useless. Do not do it. You have to be able to make it easy for them to understand. And one of the things that you've got to be able to say is, okay, so this number means that this is happening, and you can improve it by doing this. So with this player, I said your scoring chances are low because you're not getting to the middle of the ice. And you can improve that by getting a controlled zone entry, cutting to the middle, and releasing a shot. He saw that, and then lo and behold, started doing it, started getting pucks to the middle, whether he was passing it or skating it himself into the middle, and creating more high-danger scoring chances. Big one is you have to show the corresponding video. And what I have found is you need to ask what the player sees. So pull up a play, whether it be of an NHL player or of them, and say, okay, what do you see on this play? And then have them walk through what they were looking at on this play. So if I say, okay, you're not entering the zone properly, or you're just dumping it in and you're not getting puck retrievals, I have to show them that, or they're going to be like, yes, I am. So you've got to be able to show them. But then when they make a play, whether it's good or bad, I think it's always beneficial to bring it up and say, okay, what did you see here? Because I either liked or I didn't like this, or I thought you could have done this. And you talk it through with them. And I think that's super beneficial because that can also stimulate the hockey sense. In your meetings, you got to be prepared to explain your thinking. So I said to him, I think you need to play he was playing his off wing. And I said, I think you need to play on your proper wing. And he says, why? Okay, well, pucks are going by you on the boards. You're like 6'6", and you're losing physical battles because you're going in on your backhand as opposed to your forehand. That's not productive because you're 6'6" and really shouldn't be losing physical battles against guys who are much smaller. And you've got to be able to say, okay, I want you to do this because I think you will be successful for these reasons. And that relates to their goals and the team goals. So with this particular player, our team was successful when his line was dominating possession and creating scoring chances, and by the end of the year, when they were scoring. So we had to relate everything that we were doing to not only the team goals, but to his goals as well. So, okay, you want to score more. Well, you need to score more, then you need to get to the middle. You need to get to the net front. You need to release your shot earlier. You cannot shoot at shin pads. You're not trying to blow the puck through people. Things like that. Okay, once you're doing that, now you're hitting your own goals. Also, the team is doing well. So everything's got to be related, and you have to be prepared to answer questions. There's always going to be questions, whether it's the coaches, the players, they're going to have questions, and you've got to be able to answer it. And it's okay to say, I don't know. I will get back to you. I would never be afraid to say that. Check-ins. So you've got to be consistent in your messaging, whether it's player meetings, meetings at intermission. Like I would get pulled aside at intermission. Hey, what do you think of this? And if my answer is different from what it was in our meeting, that's probably not a good thing unless I have a very distinct reason as to why it's different. You've got to show them progress. So side-by-side comparisons and their trends. So I like to show players game score trends. Hey, look, you're trending upward or you're trending downward. This is probably not good. And if you show them side-by-side comparisons of, okay, this is where you were, this is an exact play you made at the beginning of the year, and now we're in December, and this is the play you've made, it's a different play that shows progress, then they see that it's helping. You've got to discuss progress within the big picture. So now we've kind of done it at a micro level with this specific play. Let's discuss your progress as it pertains to you helping the team, you playing higher up in the lineup, you getting more opportunities. And I think it's super key to ask how a player feels about their game, because if a player is not feeling confident, it probably doesn't matter because you are not getting things done. If you're not feeling confident, you're less likely to be able to succeed. From not a fan to a believer. So this was what this particular player said. This was sort of the aha moment, and I want to say it came probably 8 or 9 games into the season, maybe. When it translated to a game, it was clear that the time, effort, and commitment that we had put in really works, and it allows me as a person and a player to translate it not only to my game, but to my teammates as well. So this player went from not believing in it at all to being such a believer that there was a point he was getting into it with his teammates who weren't really as invested and as bought in, and saying, no, you need to do this because it works, and here's the proof. At one point, I'm the top scorer on the team, even though I'm not playing anymore or not really getting any more power play time, even probably getting less power play time. So I've turned him into a believer, and then by extension, he gets other people on board, and then I start getting inundated with meetings saying, okay, well, I want to meet about this, or I want to meet about this. And you've got to balance, because when you have a bunch of people coming to you, you can get bogged down. You've got to normalize it. So this is super key in 3 areas. You've got to normalize it in the coach's room, in the dressing room, and in player meetings. So in the coach's room, you have to make sure you want to get to a point where everyone's comfortable using numbers in the same fashion that they're using their own visual evaluations. So it got to the point in both locker rooms, in the coaches' rooms, where it was, okay, what's everyone's eye test rating of these players for this game? Perfect. Okay, what are the numbers ratings? Where do they stack up? Do they match? So it became part of an evaluation, part of a post-game report. And it also became part of our player meeting. So when we would go in and say, okay, in this segment, this is how we played, I would say, okay, I'd have a presentation. I'd say, okay, here are key performance indicators that we agreed on at the beginning of the season, and here's how we're stacking up. And it was that simple. It was, did we hit it or not? Yes, no. And that would give us an indication of how we were playing. And if we were losing, but we were hitting these key performance indicators, it was likely because we were hitting goalposts, or we were taking very silly penalties, things of that nature. And then in player meetings, I think it's key, because a lot of the times, and I've sat there as a player and said, well, like, I think I'm playing better. And the coach just says, well, I think you're not. And if you show them the numbers and they say, well, I think I'm the 6th best defenseman on the team, and therefore I should be playing, and then you bring up their stats and they are literally ranked 9th and 10th, then you can go, I don't know how you expect a lineup spot when you're ranked in the bottom 2 of almost every stat we keep. So it's one of those things where you've got to show them, or vice versa, they're not feeling confident, and you can go, hey, like, you've generated the most shots in the last 4 games. You've generated the 2nd most scoring chances. You are generating off zone entries. Like, you're hitting a bunch of key performance indicators. It's just not going in, but it's going to. So it's one of those things where it's got to become a normal part of your conversation. Using numbers for the team performance. So you got to make it part of your post-game report. Like I said, you do ratings for each player, you do your statistics for each player, but then as a team, it's actually quite simple. As long as you create key performance indicators that can be tracked with numbers. So we want to give up or not give up this many zone entries. We want to have this many scoring chances. We want to win this many 50-50 puck battles as a percentage. And you can hit those KPIs, then it will give you sort of a broad lens into how you played. They also help you identify underlying strengths and weaknesses. So if you didn't realize, oh, like, our team does really well attacking from the right side, well, that's something that you didn't know. Or a weakness, okay, we're giving up a ton of scoring chances from this particular area on the ice, which you can see in a shot map. Then you can go watch the video and say, okay, what's leading to that? So the numbers help you identify potential strengths and weaknesses, but then you need the video and your intuition to figure out the why. So it's one of those things where you can create a team identity of key performance indicators that are measurable, and then you can show that to the team and say, okay, this is what we're striving for. This is what we're going to evaluate you on top of our own intuition. So then we're identifying trends and issues, and then we use our instincts to figure out why. Well, then we can adjust how we're playing or how we're coaching to mitigate those issues or to capitalize on what we're doing well. As for individuals, like I said, we like to compare coaches' ratings with the game score, and we like to determine kind of what makes each player successful. So when I'm looking at various players, there's one player that we have that is one of the best, I would say, transition players, in the fact that he gets the puck from his defensive zone to the offensive zone without any issues at all. So for him, that's something that makes him successful. But then we have another player who he's successful when he's winning his faceoffs and we're retaining possession. He's successful when he draws penalties. He's successful when he gets shots off from a certain part of the ice. So you create this little profile for each player, and then you tell them, okay, we believe you're playing well because you're hitting what makes you successful. It's not about what makes everyone else successful, because each player is going to have different things. You're going to have similar things for most players, things like scoring chances and don't take dumb penalties, because we have a dumb penalty marker too, and you get in trouble for taking dumb penalties. But it's one of those things where if they're hitting what makes them successful, then they're less likely to come out of the lineup. It also gives you an idea of how each player is trending. So you can use this as part of your player meetings. You can say, okay, you've been trending down. Or if a player is coming back from injury and you notice that there's kind of a dip in their play, maybe they've re-injured and they're not saying something, because we all know hockey players do that. And now that's something that needs to be looked at. Maybe they're tired. So in university hockey, there's a ton of back-to-backs. Pretty much every weekend is a back-to-back. So if we played one player 26 minutes on night one, and then by the third period of the next game, I look down and I see that he's getting shelled, then maybe we need to taper off if we notice that in the second game, this player is getting absolutely shelled, and it's probably because they're tired. So it's one of those things where you can use it as a tool to help players understand how they're playing, and to help you as a coach understand what makes each guy or each girl successful as part of your team. So just kind of some takeaways. We need to change the language that we use, because it pushes people away when we use big words, or when we think we're too smart and we come busting in the room with all the answers. Your relationship with the player or the coach will dictate how successful you are. If you don't have a relationship, it's not going anywhere. And so you've got to build that relationship first, build that trust. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So this whole presentation has sort of been around, it's going to be uncomfortable because you're introducing a new perspective. And so you've got to be able to be comfortable that you're going to be uncomfortable saying this, and that the person that you're saying this to might be uncomfortable because it challenges how they think. So you better get comfortable being uncomfortable. Time, effort, and commitment. And this was a big one from the player that was successful. You have to show the player that you're committed to them by putting the time in, by putting the effort in, by having the hard conversations, by patting them on the back when they need it. You've got to show them that at every step you are there for them, because you need to be pulling on the rope with them as well. Using video of successful instances is super key, and also explaining why. So a perfect example of this is we have one defenseman who he loves to stand up at the blue line, and personally, like, I love that. And so when I was showing our other defensemen, I would say, okay, this is why this D's numbers are so good, because he stands up at the blue line. And then I would show the video, and it was just a montage of him stick checks at the blue line, forcing dump-ins, crushing people in open ice at the blue line, like completely making life living hell on zone entries. And he ended up with our best goals for percentage this year. And the biggie is you got to normalize numbers as part of your evaluation. So you've got to make sure that it's part of your conversation. It becomes a routine, and people will gradually get less uncomfortable, and they'll become more comfortable using it as part of their language. With that, I just want to say thanks for listening, and I will take any questions.
Thanks a lot, Rachel. Fantastic presentation. Number of questions have come in. The first one is what does the future of analytics look like to you? When they first started to come into the mainstream, I think people were looking to exploit inefficiency in the market or find some sort of inherent value in things that people didn't know. Everyone's got access to information now. So where is the value being found, in your opinion, in using analytics as a tool?
Yeah, I think for me, like I said, it depends on what league you have and what's available to you, but it's not going to be valuable unless you can differentiate between what's important and what's noise. So you've got to figure out, as a coach or as a person that's developing players, what is important for your team or for that specific player. Because if you can't figure that out, you're going to spend way too much time focused on the noise and not enough time focused on what's actually important. So I think for me, everyone's going to have somewhat similar information available to them, but it's what you can do with that information that becomes important. So can you build models? Can you communicate it effectively? Because I will never forget this, working with John Hines, if I wasn't able to communicate it effectively, he would not have used it. But I think from that perspective is you've got to find people who can communicate the tough stuff and make it understandable, and so that people get comfortable using it. And I think that's kind of the future, is how can we make it more understandable? How can we figure out what is and isn't important? Because I think right now there's just a bunch of information and no one really knows what really is important.
So I guess on that note of what's important, there are some minor hockey coaches on the call, and maybe some coaches who don't have access to the types of resources that others do. So if you could key in on two important metrics to track for a youth player or maybe a team that is just introducing into analytics, what are two of your favorites or ones that you might recommend?
Okay, so I'm going to start by saying this. If they are 15 and younger, you should not be tracking anything except for goals, assists, points, and penalty minutes, because it's about having fun. And nobody needs to be inundated with anything else at that point. Just have fun. As a coach, if you want to look at it and not use it, like, don't be yelling at your players about this. Scoring chances and that's a shot attempt from the slot. So that's a huge one for me. And then I would say probably zone entries. So if you can track quite simply how many times a player carries the puck into your zone or passes the puck into the offensive zone, like with control, that should help you, because if you are getting more zone entries than you're giving up, you should be relatively successful. But I would say the scoring chances one, it's very easy to track, and that would be where I start.
There's a number of really good questions that are in here, but one that stands out to me, do you filter at all for when events are happening on a player's shift? The turnovers that are happening, say, after 45 seconds on the ice, or maybe some way to show a player where their shift lengths are creating or negating value. Is that something that you're taking into account when you're tracking some of your metrics?
So in the NHL, yes, because we have that ability. In any other league below that, like at York, we track ice time. And there are certain things like, okay, if our average shift length is 37 seconds, we give up X amount of scoring chances. If our average shift length goes to 45, 50, 55, we're giving up nearly double the amount of scoring chances. That tells me that A, that's probably happening in the later part of the shift, and B, there's clearly a direct correlation there, and we need to extremely tone it back on how long we're staying on the ice. So I think the NHL can give you more of that, but unless you're actually sitting there and saying, okay, this player's 40 seconds into their shift and now this is happening, it becomes very difficult to do that. We don't have that sort of tracking power.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I know my first year we had a very high profile line on the Erie Otters who scored over 80% of their goals in the first 20 seconds of their shift based on a manual tracking project. So it's something that's definitely on the radar, but you spend agonizingly high number of hours logging things manually on the
Yeah. Like
laptop.
I would say don't agonize over something like that. Look at a trend. So kind of like I said, if you notice that I'm trying to think of the example of I can't remember who it was, but we had a player whose average shift length was 56 seconds. And we had another player whose average shift length was, I want to say like 38. And not shockingly, the player that had the longer shift length was giving up a ton of scoring chances and was bleeding possession like you couldn't even imagine, and was also taking really dumb penalties. So that would tell me that you're playing too much, like for too long on the ice, and it's leading to scoring chances, poor decision, and very either silly or lazy penalties because you're tired. And the penalty comes at the end of the shift. So
We'll do a couple more questions. Number one, how many KPIs do you track regularly for the team? And are there any discussions on KPIs for individual players?
um the teams kind of vary. So in New Jersey, we had like a bunch because they were tracked automatically, and all I would have to do is actually analyze it. Whereas at York, I have to track everything by hand because in most of the buildings, they don't even know how to count correctly. So things like tracking shots they fall on me. So at York, I track, I want to say like 18, maybe 20, like we'll ballpark it around 20 key performance indicators. And then for players, I kind of mentioned briefly in the presentation that each player kind of has a few. So we'll track scoring chances for every player because that's important, but then we'll track zone entries for some players. We'll track zone entry denials. We'll track, I would say 5 for each player, but all it is we track it for the whole team, and then we just have realized that that's this player's key performance. So they come up in those player meetings.
And last question that we'll have, and for everyone who's on the call who still has questions, there's going to be a post-event email with Rachel CC'd on it, so you can continue the dialogue that way. Final question. This has been a hot topic on hockey Twitter. If someone is interested in getting into the field, what is the best way to get some entry? Do you need a master's? Do you need to live in a big city where there's more access to maybe junior or pro hockey? What's your take on some good advice to give people looking to break into this field?
I would say that don't be confrontational. So it's okay to disagree, but you've got to be able to do it respectfully. So don't be yelling and screaming on Twitter and harassing people. That's a big one. But the big thing that I find has really helped a lot of people that I know is make your work public. So put stuff out there. I put stuff out there. That's how the Devils found me. Matt Kane, who's now hired by the Devils, Tyler Jello, hired by the Devils, Eric Tulsky in Carolina. All of these people had public forums. If you look at Andrew Thomas and Alexander Mandrycky, they created a website. So I think my biggest piece of advice would be, well, do your research. So make sure you learn. And a lot of these people, if you reach out to them, they'll give you resources. They'll help you. But don't be afraid to put your work out there and make it public so that people can see it and read it and critique it. Because a guy like Micah Blake McCurdy is a perfect example. He's very highly thought of in the industry, and he will, like, if he critiques your work, he will also help you and say, okay, I think you should look at it this way, or did you consider this? So I think making your work public and being willing to take criticism and feedback is probably the biggest thing.
Well, we'll wrap it up at that. Thank you very much for joining us. And I wanted to take the time to thank all of our presenters. much like Rachel, they've all offered their time and expertise at no cost, which is given us the ability to present these webinars for free. So thank you very much. Really meaningful, some great information there, and look for that post-event email to go out later this evening. Rachel, thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.